Have you ever been in a situation where love seemed so perfect on the surface, yet there was a single secret that kept gnawing at you, a truth you were never supposed to touch? Before I dive deep into this story, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? Type your city or your country in the comments below, because it's always incredible to see how stories like these connect us from every corner of the world. And while you're at it, I'd love for you to give this story a rating at the end. Was it heartbreaking, inspiring, or shocking? Let's see how you feel once we reach the end. Now, let's start with how it all began, because at first, nothing seemed wrong. When I first met Daniel, he was the kind of man every girl dreamed of. Charming, articulate, full of ambition, with just enough vulnerability in his smile to make you feel like you were the only one who could understand him. We met at a bookstore cafe, both reaching for the same novel, and somehow, that cliché moment actually worked out. He asked me if I believed in fate, and when I laughed, he looked at me with such sincerity that I couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, the universe really had a plan. Weeks turned into months, and every date felt like a scene out of a romantic movie. He was attentive, sweet, sometimes a little too secretive about certain things, but I told myself we all have parts of our pasts we don't want to share immediately. The only strange part, and the part that stuck in my mind, was how carefully he avoided any mention of his parents. He never said their names, never shared a single story from his childhood that involved them, and whenever I asked, he would smile faintly and say, "They're not really part of my life anymore." I didn't push too hard in the beginning because, after all, some people have painful histories, and I didn't want to make him relive anything traumatic. But as time passed and we grew closer, I realized how unusual it was. Family has always been important to me, and I wanted to imagine our futures intertwining not just as partners, but as two families blending together. Still, Daniel had a way of making me feel like none of that mattered when we were together. He proposed in the most breathtaking way, a candlelit rooftop dinner under the stars, with music floating in the background and the city lights glittering beneath us. When he slipped that ring on my finger, I felt like my whole life had just been rewritten into a fairy tale. But soon after, when wedding plans began, that missing piece came crashing back. I gently asked him if I should meet his parents before the wedding, imagining how wonderful it would be to bond with them, to build a foundation for the family we were about to create. His reaction was instant, sharp, almost panicked. He shook his head firmly and said, "They won't be at the wedding. You don't need to meet them." The finality in his voice stunned me. At first, I thought maybe they had passed away, but when I asked, his vague reply made it clear. They were alive, but something was terribly wrong. He insisted it was better if I never met them, that they weren't people I'd want to know. The way he looked at me when he said it was so intense, it left me both unsettled and curious. I tried to let it go, but deep inside, the unanswered question gnawed at me like a wound that wouldn't heal. That's when I made a decision I wasn't supposed to make. If Daniel didn't want me to meet his parents, I would find out why, and I would do it in secret, even if it meant shattering the perfect picture he had painted for me. The thought wouldn't leave my mind, no matter how many times I tried to silence it. I would lie awake at night beside Daniel, watching his chest rise and fall, wondering what kind of shadow he was hiding that was too dark for me to see. He would sometimes talk in his sleep, little fragmented words that didn't make sense, but every once in a while I thought I heard him whisper something like, "Not again," or "Don't tell her." That only fueled the fire inside me. So one quiet afternoon, while Daniel was at work, I decided to dig a little deeper. I started with the simplest place, the internet. Searching for his family name wasn't easy because he kept it locked down, always insisting on using his first name only whenever we met new people together. But I had seen his ID once, when he dropped it accidentally on the dresser, and I memorized the surname. When I typed it into the search bar, dozens of links appeared. Most were irrelevant, but then I found a trail, like faint breadcrumbs leading somewhere unexpected. There were mentions of a family, wealthy but controversial, involved in bitter disputes that had made local headlines years ago. There were whispers of scandals, court cases, and a mansion on the outskirts of town. But what startled me most was that every article seemed to focus on the parents. They were described as strict, controlling, and deeply invested in keeping up appearances. Some people admired them for their discipline. Others despised them for their arrogance. The more I read, the more I realized Daniel's avoidance wasn't about indifference. It was about pain. That night, when Daniel returned home, I couldn't stop staring at him differently. He noticed and asked why I seemed distant, but I brushed it off with a smile. Deep down, I knew I couldn't tell him what I'd been digging into. The next step, I realized, would have to be bolder. If I wanted the truth, I had to go to the source. A week later, I told Daniel I was meeting an old friend for lunch. Instead, I took a cab to the edge of town, where their estate was said to be. The road twisted upward, leading to a grand iron gate that loomed like something out of a Gothic novel. Vines crawled up its frame, and beyond it, I could see the silhouette of a massive house, elegant yet eerily cold. I pressed the intercom button nervously, unsure what I would say if someone answered. To my surprise, a woman's voice crackled back, sharp, commanding, almost impatient. "Yes? Who is this?" My throat tightened, but I forced out, I'm a friend of Daniel." There was a pause, then the gate buzzed and slowly opened. The moment I stepped through, a strange weight fell on my shoulders, as if I was trespassing into forbidden territory. The path was lined with marble statues, each one pristine but lifeless, and the silence around me was deafening. By the time I reached the front door, I could already feel regret clawing at me. But it was too late. A tall man with stern eyes opened the door, and for a moment, I didn't have to ask. I knew. This was Daniel's father. His gaze sliced through me like he had already judged me unworthy. "So, you're the one," he muttered, almost to himself. "I see Daniel hasn't told you much." Before I could respond, a woman appeared beside him. Elegant, beautiful in a cold, distant way, like a queen carved out of stone. Her eyes narrowed as she studied me, and then she smiled. Not a warm smile, but the kind that hides secrets behind polished manners. "Come in," she said softly, as though this meeting had been inevitable all along. By now, my secret mission to discover the truth about my fiancé's parents had taken on a life of its own, and with every step deeper into his guarded world, I realized just how fragile the foundation of our relationship truly was. Whenever I glanced at him across the table at dinner, or when we went out for coffee like any other couple, I couldn't shake the gnawing thought that the man I had promised to marry was hiding something so enormous, so life-defining, that it made everything else feel like a facade. And this isn't just me being dramatic, it was the small inconsistencies that haunted me. Like the time I casually mentioned what kind of flowers his mother might like for the wedding, and his face paled as though I had touched a forbidden subject. Or when I asked him if his father ever gave him advice about careers, and he simply froze, staring at his glass of water until the silence was unbearable. These weren't just quirks of personality, they were signs of wounds, secrets, maybe even shame. And yet, in his silence, I felt both trapped and challenged. Part of me wanted to scream at him to just tell me the truth, while the other part was fueled by a relentless curiosity to unravel it myself, to see if I was marrying a man whose love could survive the weight of his own walls. If you're watching this right now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever loved someone so much that their secrets scared you more than their honesty ever could? Comment below. Tell me your thoughts, because that's exactly where I stood, between love and doubt, between trust and fear, and unsure which would collapse first under the pressure of the truth I was chasing. One night, while he slept beside me, his phone buzzed on the nightstand, and for the first time in my life, I considered doing the one thing I always swore I'd never do, snooping. My hand hovered over that device like it was a forbidden treasure, one that promised answers, but at the cost of trust. My heart pounded, every muscle trembling, until I pulled back, unable to cross that line. But fate has a strange way of answering questions we don't dare ask, because 2 days later, while he was at work, a letter came addressed to him in handwriting I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I stared at the name on the return address, and before I could think twice, I opened it. Inside was a neatly folded card with a few simple words. "We miss you, son. Please don't shut us out forever." My chest tightened, my breath caught, and tears burned my eyes because in that moment, the truth was undeniable. His parents were alive, and they wanted him back. But why had he lied? Why hide them? Why erase them from the narrative of his life with me? Was it shame? Was it fear? Was it something darker? I tucked the letter away, and when he came home that night, I stared at him like I had never seen him before, my mind reeling with questions, my lips pressed shut to hide what I knew. That single letter was the crack in the dam, and soon everything began to unravel. I started piecing together what little information I had, checking social media quietly, searching records late at night, following the faint trails of his past like a detective desperate for answers. And little by little, I found them: photos of his parents at charity events, their smiling faces with friends, their names appearing on articles about community work. They weren't absent. They weren't dead. They weren't even distant. They were there, alive, present in the world, while I was trapped in the suffocating lie he had spun. And the deeper I dug, the heavier the questions weighed on me. Was he trying to protect me from something? Or was he protecting himself from me, afraid that if I knew the real story, I would see him differently? Nights became restless, days became heavy, and I lived in that endless loop of pretending everything was normal while carrying the unbearable truth alone. But something inside me was shifting. I wasn't just a woman waiting for the truth anymore. I was someone demanding it, someone ready to risk everything to know who I was truly marrying, even if it meant breaking apart the fragile dream we had built. And so, I made a decision. If he wouldn't bring me to his parents, I would bring myself to them. With the address I found tucked away in that letter, I planned it quietly, like someone preparing for battle. I told him I had errands, told him I needed space, and for the first time, I walked away from his shadow of secrecy and into the light of truth. My heart was pounding as I stood in front of the door that led to the answers I had been chasing, my hand trembling as I prepared to knock, every nerve screaming at me to stop, to turn back, to preserve the illusion of the life I thought I wanted. But illusions don't last forever, and love built on lies eventually cracks. And as I raised my hand, as I drew in a breath that felt like it might be my last, I knew that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. This wasn't just about parents. This wasn't just about family. It was about love, truth, and the price of pretending. The door creaked open slowly, and there they were. Two faces that mirrored pieces of the man I loved, older but undeniably his blood. His mother's eyes widened first, filled with a mix of surprise, warmth, and the kind of guarded hesitation that only comes when strangers appear carrying invisible baggage. His father stood just behind her, posture straight, gaze sharp, as if measuring me in silence. My voice trembled as I introduced myself. I'm his fiancé, and for a heartbeat, the room froze. Then his mother's lips parted, a soft gasp escaping as though those words alone had pierced years of silence. She invited me in, her hands fluttering nervously, as though she didn't quite believe this was real. The air inside the home was heavy, dense with history I didn't yet understand, and every photograph on the walls told stories of a family intact, smiling, whole, stories he had erased from the version of his life he gave me. I sat on the edge of their sofa, my heart pounding, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake, wondering if this confrontation would destroy everything I thought I had with him. But deep inside, there was a voice whispering that this was the only way forward, that truth, even if painful, was the only foundation strong enough to hold love. As we began to talk, his parents' words unraveled a narrative I had never imagined. They told me about the fights, the fallout, the choices their son had made years ago that drove a wedge so deep between them it felt irreparable. They spoke with both love and sorrow, painting him not as a villain but as a wounded man, someone burdened with expectations he could never meet, someone who walked away because he felt suffocated by the weight of being their only child. His father admitted, with tears he tried to hide, that harsh words had been exchanged, words no parent should ever say, words no son could ever forget. His mother confessed that pride had kept her silent, that letters had gone unanswered, that birthdays and milestones had passed with aching hearts. And in that moment, I realized the lie wasn't as simple as "my parents won't be at the wedding." It was a shield, a fragile protection from reopening old scars, from forcing me to see the fractures he carried inside. I sat there, torn between anger at his deception and compassion for his pain, because isn't it true that we all sometimes hide the ugliest parts of ourselves from those we love, hoping they'll never see us as broken? But even as I understood, a new fear began to gnaw at me. If he could lie about something this enormous, how many other shadows lurked in his silence? My mind replayed every quiet moment, every pause before he answered certain questions, every deflection, and the weight of it pressed harder against my chest. His parents, sensing my turmoil, reached out not with demands but with pleas. His mother grasped my hand and whispered, "Please, don't give up on him. He needs someone who won't walk away when the truth is ugly." And though her words were tender, they struck like a lightning bolt, forcing me to confront the very question I had avoided for weeks. Did I have the strength to love him not for who he pretended to be, but for who he really was, flaws, wounds, and lies included? I left their home shaken, my heart heavy, carrying the truth like a double-edged sword, because now I knew what he had hidden, but I also knew the cost of staying silent about my discovery. That evening, when I returned home, he looked at me with the same trusting smile he always gave, as though nothing in our world had shifted. But I had shifted. I had seen the truth he fought so hard to bury, and now the silence between us felt suffocating. I wanted to scream, to confront him, to demand answers, but the words tangled in my throat, because confrontation wasn't just about exposing him, it was about risking us. Have you ever had a secret that burned so hot in your chest you could hardly breathe, yet speaking it aloud might shatter everything you hold dear? That's exactly where I was, trapped between the safety of silence and the danger of truth. And so, I did the only thing I could in that moment. I waited. I studied him quietly, watching his every move, searching for the courage to break the walls that had caged us both. But the truth is, walls don't last forever. And love, no matter how strong, cannot grow in the dark. So, I made a choice. The wedding was only weeks away, and if we were to stand before friends and family and vow honesty, love, and forever, then the truth had to come out. I planned it carefully, deciding that I would confront him not with accusations but with compassion, not to destroy but to rebuild. I rehearsed my words in my head, over and over, trying to balance my anger with understanding, my hurt with hope. Because love, real love, isn't about perfection. It's about surviving the storm together. And I knew the storm was coming, one way or another. The night of reckoning came quietly, not with shouts or drama, but with the kind of stillness that makes your pulse louder than the ticking clock on the wall. We sat across from each other at the dinner table, his eyes warm and unsuspecting, mine restless and heavy with truth. I pushed the food around my plate, my mind rehearsing every word I had locked in my chest, and finally, I let the silence break. "Daniel," I said softly, my voice trembling, "I met your parents." For a moment, his fork froze midair, his entire body stiffening like I had pulled the ground out from beneath him. His eyes darkened, not with anger but with fear, a raw, vulnerable fear I had never seen before. You did what?" he whispered, almost as if he were a child again, caught in something he couldn't undo. I reached across the table, my hand shaking, and said, "I needed to understand. I needed to know why you were hiding them from me." The dam inside him broke then, and what spilled out wasn't rage, it was sorrow. He told me everything. How his father's harsh expectations had crushed him as a teenager, how his mother's silence in those moments felt like betrayal, how he had run away not just from them but from the person he thought they wanted him to be. He admitted he lied to me, not because he didn't trust me, but because he couldn't bear the thought of me looking at him the way he looked at himself, like a failure, like a disappointment too heavy to love. His voice cracked as he said, "I was terrified you'd leave me if you knew the whole truth." My eyes blurred with tears as I listened, because beneath his lies wasn't malice, it was fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of losing the one person he believed still chose him, without conditions. And in that moment, I realized love isn't about never breaking, It's about choosing to rebuild together, brick by fragile brick. I told him what his parents had shared with me, the regret in his father's eyes, the plea in his mother's voice, the aching silence that had stretched too long. At first, he resisted, his pride flaring like a wounded animal, but slowly, as my words wrapped around him, I saw the cracks in his armor widen. He buried his face in his hands and whispered, "Do you really think they still love me?" I held his hand tightly and said, "Love doesn't disappear, Daniel. It waits. Sometimes too long, sometimes painfully, but it waits." And in that fragile, trembling moment, he agreed to try, not because the wounds were healed, but because he finally believed healing was possible. The weeks before our wedding became less about flowers and guest lists and more about conversations, late nights filled with tears, with tentative phone calls to his parents, with the slow stitching of a bond that had once been shredded. The day of our wedding arrived, and when I walked down the aisle, I didn't just see him waiting at the altar. I saw two faces in the crowd, aged but glowing with hope, watching their son step into a new chapter of life. His father's eyes were wet, his mother's smile trembling, and Daniel's hand squeezed mine with a strength that told me he was no longer running. He had chosen to stand, to face, to begin again. And that, more than the vows, more than the rings, was the true marriage, the marriage of truth to love, of wounds to healing, of fear to courage. As we said, "I do," I knew that our story wasn't about hiding or pretending. It was about surviving the storm together and coming out stronger, hand in hand. Because sometimes the most beautiful weddings aren't the ones free of scars, but the ones where scars are seen, honored, and embraced. Tell me, wherever you're watching this from, would you have gone to his parents' house if you were in my place? Would you risk breaking the person you love to finally uncover the truth? And before you go, don't forget, like this video, subscribe to Outstanding Stories, and rate this story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your thoughts keep us going, and your support helps us share more stories of love, struggle, and redemption with the world.